I'm going to be showing you how to stitch these beautiful little twisted florets. This is the wrapped woven picot stitch, and you can see I'll show you from the side. There are 3 different ways of embellishing it with beads and sequins, and I'm going to show you each of these methods as I show you the stitch. So let me start by showing you this stitch in action. This is a sampler that I just finished. And you can see these stitches are all in the center. Lots of dimension. I hope that's coming through in the video. Lots of beads, lots of color. So let me show you the stitch. So for this stitch, you are going to need 2 specialty needles. This is a doll needle, and this is a tapestry needle. We need a very long strand of woven picot stitch, and so that's why we need the very long doll needle. And because it's a woven stitch, we need a needle that has a blunt edge, and that's what the tapestry needle is for. Now in these 3 stitches, you can see each one looks slightly different. I'm going to move the needles. This sample is made with the DMC. This is the Cotton Redder's Mat. And I talk about this a lot. It's one of my favorite threads to stitch with. You can now find a lot of the colors at Michael's, and I also have videos on that I can link in the description. I really like how this one works up. It's thick without being overboard, I think. And it has like a nice, well, because it's a matte thread, it just has a nice matte look to the finished stitch. This middle one here is slightly thicker. You can see it's a little bit bigger than this one. It's like poofier, that's how I would describe it. And it's a little wispier because I used the DMC. This is the tapestry wool. So what I love about the tapestry wool is when you look at it close up, you can see the wispy little fibers of the wool. And that's one of my favorite things about using this thread. So I like how this is the same stitch, but these 2 both look completely different. Even though this is a type of like a cotton wool matte thread, and this is the actual tapestry wool, they both look completely different. So you can get a lot of variety in your stitches just by switching up the threads. And now this one, you can see it sits a little bit closer to the fabric. It still has a ton of dimension, but it works into a smaller floret type stitch. And this is the Sue Spargo Eleganza Pearl Cotton. This is the size 5. This comes in a size 8, which is the thinnest, and a size 3, which is slightly thicker. I like the middle, the size 5 for this stitch. This is made by Wonderful Specialty Threads, and these are the Sue Spargo colors. So you can see that has a nice shine to the threads that's different than this cotton matte thread. So each one, the stitches are all done exactly the same way, but you can see just using different threads, you can get a variety of looks on your embroidery piece. So I'm going to demonstrate this stitch with the Cotton Redder's Mat. And we are going to start by placing the doll needle first. Now, when you're placing this, I'm putting it behind the fabric. Okay, so wherever the needle ends, which for this sample, I'm ending it right here, that's going to be the base of your stitch. I'm going to thread, and that will make more sense as we work through this stitch. I cut a nice length of thread, much more thread than I would normally use for my embroidery, because I don't want to run out of thread midway through this stitch. It's just easier to stitch it with a continuous piece of thread, and I knot the end of this thread. So I have my tapestry needle, and I'm coming up behind the fabric, and I'm right now laying my foundation rows of stitches. So this is my first stitch. I'm bringing it behind the needle, So it's making like an upside down V, or like an A without the bar across. And I'm gonna just take it down below the fabric now. So that's my first foundation row. Now my next one, I'm bringing it up on the left-hand side of the needle, and I'm coming a little bit closer to the needle for this row. I'm also going to take this one, oops, and I can tell I got a little bit of my threads caught in the fabric. There we go. So now I'm going to take this also behind that needle, and now these are my 3 rows that I'm working with. So my first stitch, I'm going to work it this way. I'm going to just go over and under and over. Because it's being woven, these are all worked above the fabric, so I'm not going above and below the fabric. Now this is where I twist my hoop, and I keep it here the whole time. I just want to make sure that these foundation threads are nice and neat. And I'm pulling it nice and tight, but as you work this stitch, you're going to be, I'll actually show you before I explain it. So my next row, I'm doing the opposite of what I just did. So now I'm going under and over and under. And you can just always check by looking at your last row of stitches. So this middle row here, I had taken my thread under it, which is why I'm going over it now. Okay, so see, it's not exactly lined up with it nicely. What you do is just take your needle and kind of push the stitches up towards the top of your needle. And now I'm going to work it the opposite again. And as you do that next stitch, that's also a good opportunity to just tighten your stitches. You don't want gaps. Like you don't want a gap of space like that in between your stitches. So what I normally do is as I go to stitch my next row, that's when I push it up nice and tight. And I'll sometimes even pull the thread a little bit so that I just keep a nice tension on my stitches the whole time. And you can see I'm just going back and forth, pulling my stitches nice and tight. And really, you can keep doing that because these are woven and they're not going in and out of your fabric. They are movable at this point. So just keep doing that. So I'm going to keep going with this all the way to the end. And then I'll show you how we end this stitch and then create the floret. So I'm getting very close to, oops, no, I lost track of where I was. I'm getting very close to where my needle ends. And I'm going to do a few more stitches just to, I try to make sure that my foundation stitches are completely covered. So I just keep weaving as long as possible in order to cover those up. You can see I'm getting really, really close. I think I can do one more row. I can sneak one more in here. Okay, so this is the point. You can see there's just a tiny little stitch on either side, foundation stitch that you can see. So this is the point where I now remove this needle. And I'm going to just flip it around so it's a little easier to see. I'm going to secure my thread, or I'm going to take it below the fabric, and I'm just basically covering up those little stitches. So I'm bringing it up through the fabric again and just kind of like burying those stitches which I guess doesn't really matter for the next part of this, but I just like that nice finished look. So now you can see I still have some thread left, which is perfect for this next part. If you get to the point where you barely have any thread left though, what I would do is just run your needle through a few of these stitches. You could tie a little knot, cut it off, and start with a new piece of thread. But I'm okay with this tiny little bit of thread I have left. So now you can see this is what I meant by the base of your stitch is connected to the fabric. So you could have done this stitch longer if you wanted. You can do the stitch the length of the doll needle. I just kept it this way for the sake of the video tutorial. But if you want your stitch to be longer than this, however you insert it into your fabric, like however much of the needle is behind your fabric, that's how long your stitch is going to be. So that's kind of my guide. So if I want to do an even longer version, I just make sure that, let's see, I'll adjust my camera a little bit. You could see that this would make a stitch that's much longer than this one. So that's the nice thing about these doll needles. You really can vary the size of your stitches as long as you have one basic doll needle. So now it's attached to the fabric right here. And now I'm going to wrap it. So wrapping it it's a little bit trial and error until you get it to look nice. But I'll sometimes give it a twist before I just start wrapping it around. And I don't want it to be too tight. I want it to have like a nice shape to it. And that actually turned out really well the first time. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes I have to play around with it a little. So once you're happy with the position, I'll bring the needle up behind the fabric. And remember, I still have my thread connected to it. So I'm going to bring it up and I'm going to try not to disturb it because I really liked the shape of it. That's good. And now I'm just going to take my needle through that little top loop that we had kind of created with that stitch. And that's just going to secure this in place here. It's the same thread, so it matches. So you can't see, like there's not a different color thread that I've added. So it all looks like part of it. And now I'm just going to go through this and pick a few more places. I'm bringing my needle up under the wrapped piece so that you can't really see the stitch. I'm going to bring it through the fabric. And then I'm just going to take it through this wrapped picot. And that's what secures it in place. I don't want it to move around. And you can see my stitch isn't even visible. It's tucked away and hidden, but I'm securing this little floret in place. And I'm just going to do that maybe in one more spot after this. I have enough thread. My stitches are being buried, and I can even do one in the center if I wanted. If you're not adding beads, that might be a nice idea. I know I'm going to be adding something to the center of this, so I'm going to have more stitches that secure it, but I might as well just add one more in here. And you can see my stitch is nicely added. Actually, I'm going to add one more over on this side because this one part here feels like it wants to move around. There we go. So you can see on this sample hoop that I had shown you, I added little clusters of them. And I have to tell you, when I first started this, it looked really ugly because that was the first stitch that I laid down on this project. So I just had like random little clumps of, it didn't look like much of anything. And it wasn't until I went through and added the rest of the stitches and the beads that it really started coming together. So don't completely scrap your project if you see that it's not looking right. Keep working with it. That's what I always try to do, unless I really, really hate it. And then you can cut your project and start over again. So I finished my thread and I am going to just run it under like twice. And then I'm just going to tie a little knot. You don't have to tie a knot, but because I have enough thread, I'm doing that. And I'm also being aware of how much I'm pulling on the thread because I didn't want to mess up the tension here. So we've done this stitch, and now I'm going to show you the 3 different ways that you can embellish this stitch. Okay, so to embellish this, I'm using, this is my favorite beading thread. This is a 12 weight cotton. It's by Wonderful Specialty Threads, and it's called Fruity. So I have a length of this cut. I'm also going to be using my sequins and beads kit from John Bead, and I'll link this below too. I love this because it has a great variety of sequins. It has some bugle beads and different colors of seed beads. And then I have bugle beads in here, but I wanted a different color bugle bead. And so these are also by John Bead. These are just the check seed beads, and they're bugles. So you can see on this one, I added the white bugles in there and stacked the green sequins and beads. So I'm going to do that same thing here. And I have a thinner embroidery needle this time. And I am just bringing my needle and thread up in the center of the stitch that we just created. Now you do want to make sure that the needle that you choose, if you're using bugle beads, you just want to make sure that your bugle bead can pass through the needle and the needle can go through it twice. Your bugle bead can pass through the needle. No, you want your needle to be able to go through the bugle bead twice. And I'll show you why. Bugle beads are the only ones that sometimes give me trouble with the needle. So you just want to make sure your needle's thin enough to be able to go through your fabric, slide it through the stitch, add a bugle bead and a few other beads, and then go back through. Okay, so I'm going to take, I've added my bugle. I'm going to add a seed bead here and a sequin and another seed bead. And I'm just putting these all on the needle right now. And I'm going to pick another sequin. I like these variety packs because I can pick and choose what I want to use, what colors and everything. And I'm going to add one more of these. So that's what's on my needle after my bugle bead. I'm going to take this all through. And you can see there it is. Now my very last bead that I put on, I'm just going to push it up. And now I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go through all the other beads that are on that needle. So I'm going back through the sequins, back through the bugle bead. Somehow I got my needle stuck on my thread. This can be a little bit fiddly, so just be patient. Going through that bead, and now I'm going back down through the bugle bead. You can see my needles coming out there. And I'm going to take it down through the fabric. Now what is holding it on here is this top bead that you didn't take your needle through. So that is what is going to secure it in place. And then I'm just going to shift my beads through. I've got lots of other dimension on this piece, so it wants to catch on it. And I just kind of hold on to my top bead as I pull my thread all the way through. And again, be wary of your tension. You don't want to pull it too tight. You want there to be a little give with your beads. So you can see it kind of moves around. And I'm going to be adding others along here too. I'm going to do the same exact thing. So I'm bringing my needle back up again in another spot nearby where I had these beads. I'm going to add another bugle. And I'm going to add a different stack of beads and sequins. I can mix up how I want the placement of these and mix up the beads that I use. Oops. And I'll try a different sequin. I think that's good. I like to vary how many beads are on my piece too, so that it shows like a variety of heights when you look at it from the side. So again, I just push the top bead up, and then I take my needle down through everything else. And gently pull it through. And then this is where I hold on to that top bead just to make sure my threads aren't getting tangled and it's going to the right spot. So you can see I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stacks here, all varied. Some I left the tension a little looser, some I made it a little tighter just so that we have a variety of what the beads are doing. Now for this one, I added beads just throughout this. So you could do all of these methods on one floret if you wanted to, or you could just do a variety of methods throughout your piece. So to add beads, I'm just picking a random spot in my floret, bringing my needle up, and I'm just going to add a bead to my needle. And you just kind of push it aside and forget about it as you take your needle right through that again. And you can adjust how it sits before you pull it tight. And you can add them all over. You can play with the colors and the shapes. And then to add sequins, you're going to use the same method. So this one, I scattered sequins throughout, which I kind of really liked. I wasn't sure how this was going to look, but I think this might be like one of my favorites. I don't know if it's just the combination of the sequins with this thread or what, but I love how that looks. So to add the sequins, I'm just going to pick a spot over here. And I'm going to put a sequin on my needle. I'll use one of the bigger ones so it will show up. So I'm putting the sequin on. And you can see I just kind of push the sequin or the bead aside and forget about it until it hits my stitch. And that's when I can decide I wanted this to stand off of the stitch a little bit, so I just kind of maneuver it around and pull my thread, and then there it is. I'll add one more. I'll add one up top here so you can see it a little bit better. So we're going to put one more sequin on. Forget about it as you take your needle back down. And then before you pull it tight, this is where you do your little adjustments if you want it to be standing up or if you want it to lay down. So that is the wrapped woven picot stitch, which creates these beautiful little florets. And there are the 3 methods for embellishing it. So I hope you had fun with this stitch. It really is a fun one to add into your projects, and I'll show you this again here. Enjoy this one and happy stitching!